please, can we stop butchering Psytrance basslines? They're, without any exaggeration, one of the simplest things to sound design. And yet, after some discussions with my students and some scrolling on YouTube, I realized that many overcomplicate this process for no obvious reason. And I'm not even talking about the wrong information some of these YouTube videos are spreading about Psytrance basslines. So, enough is enough. In this tutorial, I'll demystify the whole Psy-based sound design process by teaching you everything you need to know to create your own basslines using Serum 2. But before we dive into this tutorial, if you want to support my work, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Things like that helps the channel a lot. And if you feel like buying me a coffee, but you don't live around, you can always consider hitting that super thanks button. Now that said, let's dive into this tutorial. The reason why I chose Serum 2, it's not because it just went out and oh my god, it's the best synthesizer ever. I chose Serum 2 because it has everything we need to create what I like to call a pseudo-perfect Psytrance bassline. What I mean by that? A proper Psytrance bassline is clean, tight, its notes are perfectly timed so they don't overlap with each other's, neither with the kick so they don't eat its transient, they are locked in phase, and there's no muddiness in the low end. And Serum 2, it has every tool and feature we need to create this proper Psytrance bassline. What I mean by that? Let's create the most basic Psy bass ever using Serum 2. For that, we need a saw wave. And don't believe any person that would tell you don't need a saw wave, you need like a crazy shape that comes from outer space. A proper Psytrance bassline that you hear on big festivals is made using this proper basic saw wave. So for that, let's take the phase randomization to 0. I want the phase to be locked in. I want it to start at the 0 crossing right in here. Now let's take it 1 octave lower, and I'm going to filter it using a low pass filter. I use filter 2, and I'll filter it using the second filter in here. We'll go with a low pass. I'll go with low 18, but you can go with whatever low pass filter you like. So let's take the resonance down and let's close it. And of course, let's send the first filter to the second filter. Now I'm going to control the cutoff of this bassline using the first macro. Now I like to use the macros to control every aspect of the bassline. I'll show you how in a bit. Now I'm going to modulate the filter cutoff using the second envelope, just like so. I like using the second envelope, but you can go with whatever you like. I'll set the envelope to BPM. I'll set the decay in here to 1/16, just like so. And I'm going to control the intensity of the envelope modulating the filter cutoff in the modulation matrix using the second macro, just like so. Now let's go back to the oscillator section in here, and with the third macro I'll control the sustain of the second envelope, and this will act as some sort of a snappiness control. Check this out. First of all, I'll open the filter a little bit. I want some bleeding in the low end. Check this out. Something like so is really good. Now let's modulate the filter cutoff using the second envelope. We'll do with the second macro. And now let's add some snappiness with the third macro. So first macro, let's call it cutoff. Second envelope to filter. And the third, let's call it snappiness. Now, we have a little issue, and that is, check the oscilloscope in here. The length of the note is overlapping. Let's mute it, first of all, so you can see it. So, see, the note length will overlap with the kick. If I'll add the kick in here, see, it will overlap with its transient. So we need to fix that. The first thing we're going to do is set the release of the amp envelope to the most, let's say, minimum value possible before it starts clicking. Now, in my experience with Serum, 4 milliseconds is more than enough. Below it, we'll start having some clicks. So before we add this, next step, we're going to use a note length device to shorten the length of the note. This device exists in Ableton and Bitwig. Not sure about other DAWs, but if you don't have any other DAWs, just go to the MIDI clip and shorten the MIDI note length, basically. So we're going to activate it, and usually with 150, 149 BPM, 98 milliseconds of a note length is more than enough. Check this out. See, we still have a tiny bit of a release in here. If we really want to take it off, let's set the note length to 97 milliseconds, just like so. See, we don't have any overlapping anymore. Now that we fixed the length of the notes of the bass line, it's time to create the phase dispersion effect. And this is where things gets really interesting in Serum 2. Now, we create this phase dispersion or phase shift effect for two main reasons. First of all, to alter the timbre of the bass line, and second of all, to squeeze some decibels out of it by phase aligning it with the kick and basically reducing the headroom and just making it loud and fat. And of course, if there are some phase issues, to fix those phase issues too. Now, to create this phase shift effect inside of Serum, we're going to go to the first filter, and that's why I left it blank. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to use the diffuser effect. The diffuser effect or filter is essentially an all-pass filter. What it is doing is altering the phase relationship of some of the frequencies without touching their amplitude. Essentially, what it's doing is the same effect that we used to do using multiband compression or multiband saturation, or even in my original Sybase tutorial, I used the multiband effect from Bitwig. This one, if you remember that tutorial. And by the way, I think I need to make a new tutorial just to show you how to make the Psytrance bassline inside of Bitwig, because now the new Bitwig 5 has, just like Serum 2, everything we need to create the proper Psytrance bassline or a pseudo-perfect Psytrance bassline. If you want to see that tutorial, leave me a comment down in the comment section. That said, how we will use the diffuser filter? For that, I'll set the resonance to 0, and the most straightforward way to use it is by, first of all, setting the key tracking on, and to make sure that we're key tracking correctly, we'll set the cutoff in here to 440, or any A note you can think of. And now I'm pretty sure that this diffuser effect is properly key tracking, so every time we play a different note, I know that the phase shift effect is going to be on point. And now, with the stages and the resonance, we can control the intensity of this effect, and with the resonance parameter, we can actually phase align it with the kick. Check this out. What I like to do, and I've experimented a lot to get to this formula, so please take the time to find the formula that works best for you, is to set the stages in here to 7, right? So now we have this, check this out, check the oscilloscope, right? And now, when I'll change the resonance, look what we will get. Now, I like my bassline clicky, so the first envelope in here, I'll set its tag to 0. So essentially, what we're looking at creating in here is a pseudo kick shape with the bassline. Why? Because this shape will give us the best results in terms of phase alignment with the kick, and essentially we will get the loudest and fattest bass possible. Now, if I'll add the kick in here, check this out. We're looking at having the length of the first cycle of the bassline to be identical or as close as the length of the first cycle of the kick. We're talking about the first cycle when the kick and the bass starts playing. And in this configuration, it'll be impossible to perfectly phase align all of the cycles of the bassline with the kick, because the frequency of the kick actually goes lower than the bassline. So you can see the phase shift that's happening in here. Actually, this is not a big issue, because at the end, they are almost perfectly phase aligned, but we're getting the benefit of having a really nice low end of the kick. So, you know, there's always some sort of a choice that you have to make. You can't perfectly phase align everything if you need like a really nice oomph in the low end. I hope that makes sense. So now what I'm going to do, I'll take another oscilloscope that will show us the kick and the bass, and I'll show you how moving the resonance parameter is going to change the phase relationship between the kick and the bass. Check this out. Now, before we start modifying the resonance parameter in here, I'm going to add some groove to the bass line, and for that I'm going to modulate the level of the oscillator in here using the velocity. I've already changed the velocity of the notes in the MIDI pattern. I've talked about that in my first Psytrance bassline tutorial, link right in here. So now we have this, check this out. See? Now let's change the resonance parameter in here and see how it's affecting the relationship between the kick and the bass. See, because of the phase shift that we're having with the kick, actually adding an exaggerated resonance amount will give us really nice results when it comes to phase alignment. check this out. But I'm going to set it to somewhere about in here. Always check the relationship between the kick and the bass using two oscilloscopes. One that will give you the sum of the kick and the bass, and the other will give you the kick and the bass separately, because each one of them will give you a different detail that will help you take the right decision. If you like this content and want to dive deeper into Psytrance sound design, check out Psyche Volume 3 preset bank for Serum 2, link in the description. Now, before we move to the last chapter of this tutorial, why is it so important to have the diffuser or the phase dispersion effect before the low-pass filter and before the VCA or the amp of Serum? Well, because remember in my original tutorial, when I've added the multiband processing, the bass notes became longer because of this phase shift effect. So they were overlapping with each other and they were overlapping with the kick. Now, to fix the overlapping with the kick, we've added side chaining, but we couldn't fix the overlapping between the bass notes. So basically we were losing a little bit of the clarity, or we had to make the notes really short. And when we have the diffusion or the phase dispersion effect before the amp, we make sure that each of the notes is perfectly timed and we don't need any annoying processing to fix the overlapping issue. So if I go to the effects in here, add an equalizer, just like so, take down some of the lower mids. And this is just for the example. Honestly, I don't think we need to take the lower mids of this baseline, but yeah, let's take them for the sake of the example. Let's add a distortion, just like so. Let's compensate the volume that we lost. Maybe go with, I don't know, soft clipping. I'm just doing this for the sake of the example. Take a look at the oscilloscope. Let's take the kick out. We're still not affecting the length of the kick, maybe a tiny bit. And in this case, we can still add any utility in here, take its level down, modulate it with the first envelope. And this utility in here is going to act as our VCA. Check this out. Without it, we had this. Like slight overlapping, and actually I'm overdoing the soft clipping just for the sake of the example. And with this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. I'll see you in the next one.